All right. Again, welcome everybody. I'm so glad that you could join us tonight. I'm also excited because my dear friend Mary is here. She's going to help facilitate anything in the chat. Trying to get her to help admit people to the video, but it's not working. So I'm going to have to let people in. But again, at some point, I'm going to have to focus on the slides and they'll get the recording. So hopefully they're not too upset about it. But I'm so glad you could make it. So many of you. I am the director of the YogaFit for Warriors program and the Warrior Kids program. We've been in business, YogaFit, since 1998. The Warriors program was really one of the first trauma-informed yoga programs on the scene back in 2013. Mary and I were the first ones to lead it at Fort Belvoir. It was just an amazing experience, and what a ride it was for us these last, my gosh, we're going on, close to 10 years now. Unbelievable. Along the way, we started to realize, and especially when we got our hands on this amazing book, The Body Keeps the Score, that links, of course, childhood trauma to things like developmental trauma disorder, to things like anxiety and depression, and explains trauma from the standpoint of the nervous system, the things we're going to go over briefly tonight. Can't go into in depth, but I'm going to try to hit all the highlights, and why things like isolation for a human, neglect for a human, being separated from your peers and disconnected from society is a trauma. And don't be scared. Hey, there's some good news. We have some real powerful tools at our disposal to help mitigate those impacts. But this book, this is what drove the Warrior Kids program, and in particular, the YogaFit for Warrior Kids Childhood Trauma Workshop. All right, but let's go to the topic at hand. I just want to kind of introduce the background. I am was military. It's weird to say I'm retired now, Lieutenant Colonel in the Air Force Reserves, and I retired right at the end of the pandemic. 28 years in the military. I'm also a military spouse. I do have 2 teenagers myself. I have a 17-year-old. She is actually on Netflix right now, but she did have 2 tests today. So she gets to do that. And I remind her, I was like, hey, I'm on a webinar right now. So if I could get her to join me, I would, but she's a little shy. She's just my pride and joy. And my son as well. He's my pride and joy, but he is in college. So he's 19. I still call him a teenager. I'm going to call him a teenager for a little bit longer. He's still acting like a teenager, but he's awesome. He's a sophomore at Seton Hall. We just got to see him recently. But he was always my extroverted kid and out there, always had no problem making friends. So it was a real shock to me last year when he was a freshman in college. And you can imagine how that was, isolated in his dorm. And he spiraled into some severe anxiety, panic attacks. Of course, I know he wouldn't want me to share too much about that, so I'll keep it at that. But I know he's not the only one. And he was my, quote, strong one, right? And so I was like, what is happening here? So I got to witness that firsthand, like so many of you. And then my daughter, next door, doing homeschool for the whole year last year, and her hair started falling out. And she kept saying, oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm like, but that's not right. That's not normal. Maybe some of you experienced hair loss or something similar, even post-COVID. Of course, we know that was happening. All right, so let me go to the share screen here, right to it. And you will get a copy of this. If you signed up, we'll send a PDF out of these slides. So don't worry about it. Let me go to the slide. If you can't see it, let me know or put it in the chat real quick. And then Mary will speak up and let me know. A little bit of information here about what we're going to talk about. And exactly what I was talking about earlier is, this was shocking in December when the U.S. Surgeon General came out and this huge report, and there's links to all of this information at the end of the slideshow. And I'll just ask again, if you're unmuted, to mute yourself so we don't have that background noise. If you don't mind, please go ahead and mute yourself. So we had a crisis in teen mental health before the pandemic. I mean, everybody knew it. We were all talking about it. We were all concerned about it. I mean, of course, there were school shootings, there was bullying, there was that increased usage of social media, which drives all of us insane. I don't have an answer for that. I know there is a correlation between the development of the iPhone in 2007 and social media apps and the steep decline in our teens and children's mental health. That's what I know. And there's a lot of information out there on it. I'm not going to go into social media and apps. That's a whole nother workshop. And it makes my stomach get a little ulcery. So, but moving on, we have to start with some of the bad news. So suicide rates between 2007 and 2018, right before the pandemic, had already increased by 57% in 10 to 24-year-olds, right? That's a jaw-dropping number. That's huge. So we were in crisis before the pandemic. Then the pandemic hit. So between 2019 and 21, and we're still, of course, just getting data in for the last 2 years. We're a little behind, but it's coming in. People are looking at it. This is some of the first information, and how quick they were to make this report. Once they got it, they said, hey, we have a massive problem here. We knew that as parents, educators knew that. The government got involved and said, a call to action. This is urgent. This is a crisis. So emergency room visits for suicide attempts went up 50% for girls and 4% for boys. It seemed to affect girls more than boys in some ways. Rates of depression and anxiety doubled during that time. So 25% of kids, one in four reported depressive symptoms, and 20% with anxiety. Suicide is the number one cause of death for kids ages 14 through 15. This is the link to that report. You can look through it yourself. I highly recommend it. Some really good information, some other deep dives in there, and lots of cool resources that I wasn't even aware about till I read it myself. Of course, we know there's multiple factors that can lead to this. I'm not going to negate there's biological factors, there are genetic factors, predispositions, some other things. But in general, we want to look at that holistic picture, which is what yoga does so well, right? The holistic picture. Social and economic inequalities. Of course, we looked at the massive issues with racism this last year. Neighborhood safety. Of course, we're seeing an increase now in gun violence, concerns about safety everywhere. Relationships with peers and teachers and mentors have an impact. Our community, of course, that was greatly degraded during the pandemic. Parents, caregivers, and siblings. Many children may not have thought about this. A lot of their caregiving is done by grandparents. Maybe you do know that. Many of our children lost their grandparents to COVID, or fears of losing their parents or grandparents to COVID weighed heavily on our teens. That was a big part of that report. Of course, financial stability. How many people lost their jobs? Food insecurity. Of course, there was a big rescue package. I believe that helped to mitigate a lot of those impacts. So that was nice. We know there was an increase in domestic violence when you're trapped at home, right? Dramatic change in schedules, outlets of release going away, and then now here we're at home. So that increased. All right, so everything, layers of this have this impact. For those who practice yoga, you guys might also say, that looks an awful lot like that holistic picture of mind, body, spirit, social view of how we're impacted at all layers and levels of our being. This is the class of 2025, right? They're not there yet. They're in the midst of it right now. So what factors impacted them and their decline in mental health? Number one, of course, I think it impacted all of us, was social isolation. We're going to look at that from the standpoint of polyvagal theory briefly, and why isolation is perceived as a life threat event by the brain and the nervous system. We're hardwired for connection. When that's taken away, whether you can't choose to not feel that as a threat. That is wired when you come into this world. That's why we need a loving caregiver to help us survive and grow and thrive. That doesn't really end. We need a community and feelings of connection to thrive in our life, our children especially, and especially our precious teens. Remote learning from school, of course. Actual fear of getting COVID, very high in our kids and our young adults. Income insecurity and death or illness of a family member. Some other big numbers here. Again, there seems to be some disparities here between girls and boys. And of course, we know girls, relationships, peers, social media focus that having maybe a greater impact here. I don't have the deep dive information on that, but I think more will come on why we see that disparity. So anxiety, of course, seeing that increase. Of course, I dealt with that with my son, right? That was out of the blue, completely new experience for me. And for him, it even took him by surprise. He goes, I don't understand why this is happening. I want to be at school. I'm not trying to feel anxious. I'm like, well, nobody tries to feel anxious, first of all, but let's see what we can do about it. And there's some cool tools that we figured out that worked for him. Depression, of course, we know anxiety and depression from the yoga standpoint is a system out of balance. It's not a disorder as we sort of define it in the West. Even though I believe there is absolutely a biological component, genetic component to it, predisposition. Yoga says, when you're out of balance, we all feel anxious or depressed. We normalize, we don't pathologize anxiety and depression. Wow, sleep issues. Whew. Mary and I were just sharing today, Mary and I, coincidentally, we didn't know it, both got new mattresses. So that's beside the point. But we're talking about, hey, we all have sleep issues. Our kids, their schedules were disrupted. Sleep issues are a problem. We've seen insomnia rates go through the roof this last 2 years. And we start to see isolating. That's a sign of sorts, a sign and symptom. Of course, how do you know what's the difference between regular isolation and extra isolation here? And then, of course, aggressive behaviors. Going into what is trauma briefly, and we are trauma-informed school. YogaFit is our trauma-informed approach. And that is absolutely, yoga's main focus is to help us to understand how trauma operates in the body. I believe if we're really kind of doing it right, we have to all look at how we've been impacted by stress and trauma in our lives. And it can take many different forms. But really, trauma, the pandemic, we could argue, sure, it set the conditions to be a traumatic event. You look at the isolation, you look at the threat of disease, and a threat of disease from a virus that we can't use our senses to defend against, right? So then, and then we have, of course, the, disparity in how do we defend against it? Do we even need to defend against it? I'm not going into all of that, but that causes massive anxiety in people who are concerned about getting the disease. So trauma is a result of an extreme lack of choice, perceived or otherwise, right? And we can see how different narratives play out here as we're trying to figure out how to deal with this now pandemic as we move forward in year 2. What mitigation measures am I comfortable with versus you? And how do we make that, something effective for the whole of society? I don't know. I think that's a very challenging thing, the individual versus the collective. I don't have the answer for that. I struggle with that myself. Again, how much control do we have? And it's a struggle for control, of course. Immobilization leads to a very different brain activity than being able to fight or flee. That's that shutdown. And we're going to look at a picture of the vagal ladder and what does shutdown do to us versus activation when we can mobilize for our own defense. Now, during the pandemic, we didn't have a lot of options to mobilize for our defense, right? Because it was a new story. It was a new threat that we didn't have anything in the playbook to pull out to say, yep, this is how we dealt with it before. The brain says, I got nothing. A lot of us went to shutdown because we didn't have a playbook. We didn't have a plan, right, to address that threat. I think we do now. I think we really do. I think we're coming out of it. And, right or wrong, or whether you believe it or not, vaccines and masks and these mitigation efforts have allowed people to, reinsert themselves back into society and feeling comfortable to do so. But immobilization is, that extreme shutdown that really, held over time does kind of the most damage. And so, kind of put that in your back pocket for just a second. And also we had kind of relationship traumas, maybe within the individual, within their families, but also in the society. And we always have resource recommendations. This book's going to be in the back of the slide here, so hang in there. Trauma Through a Child Dies and In an Unspoken Voice by Dr. Peter Levine. He is the master on trauma. We use his resources, his books throughout the Warriors and Warrior Kids programs. This is the ACE study test. Now, this is the updated version. If you're not familiar with the ACE study, this is something we talk about in Warrior Kids. And this is the first study done. And I know many of you are familiar with it, right? The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study done by Kaiser Permanente in the 90s. And what did it look like? Well, it looked at the impact of, yes, stressful life events in childhood across a lifetime and these health outcome measures. So these are the questions, and they've been updated, right? So you can, you're going to get this, you can take this test online, anybody can. I believe we all should know our ACE score. Our ACE scores determine or help to, I think, give us a little bit more visibility and awareness that we may be predisposed to these negative health outcomes throughout a lifetime. And why that is really sort of the big takeaway from this study. Because, you think, well, if I've had stress and trauma in my childhood, I'm more likely to overeat, I'm more likely to smoke, drink, drugs, and that's all true. But why you do that is actually separate from the behavior itself, and that's because it impacts our stress response system. So the really wild thing about this study is that regardless of behavioral choices, even if you eat healthy and exercise and have, supposedly good relationships, you are going to have a lesser or lower lifespan overall because it changes your stress response system at the fundamental biological level. And that's the HPA stress response system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenals. In other words, it dials us up too hot, like the thermostat of the brain. The stress response system is dialed to too hot or too cold. So it's, in other words, right, your system's going off all the time, like your air conditioning system. It's just going off all the time and it's expending a lot of resources and energy. And when you do that, the body's natural response to help dampen that is cortisol. And that causes inflammation. That's keeping it simple, why that lessens a lifespan. regardless of behavioral choices. Now, can we do something about that stress response system? 100%, 100%. So there's always a good news, but these questions are maybe useful for yourself to go through, of course, or maybe for your children. All right. So this is how it impacts it. Again, very simply put, this pyramid, right, of development. So from conception down here, even intergenerational trauma. We know intergenerational trauma is real. I will pull out my favorite book on that by Thomas Hübl, Healing Collective Trauma. If you want to dive into and are curious about intergenerational trauma, he's the master. His languaging about it is really cutting edge, and he has some really interesting research projects about intergenerational trauma. Of course, he predominantly studied Holocaust victims and their families, right? Generations of it. So really interesting stuff. So we don't come in with a blank slate, right? We all come in different and with those different historical perspectives. Everybody's into genealogy, everybody's into their, DNA. So really kind of interesting to think about, wow, we don't all come in even into this world, in other words. And I don't know why that is, but it's just the truth. Now, when we're born, we may be born into, as a minority, we may be born into poverty. We may be born in a war-torn zone, or, in areas that are really isolated and disconnected, or families, immigration, etc. So it all is in context, and that affects us. And then, see, that's before the adverse childhood experiences. Think about that. That's before. Now you add in, now if you're born into poverty and you're born, the deck stacked against you as a minority, then you're going to have a stressor. Guess what? It hits your system harder. You don't have those skills. Like a plant doesn't have that strong enough root system, or as strong a root system as it needs. And so now here comes a drought. That plant's going to be impacted more by it, to put it in kind of in another analogy. Then that impacts our brain, our neural development. That actually impacts our ability of our brain to grow and connect properly. Then that affects us across the social, emotional, and cognitive realms. Of course, now we're getting into yoga stuff here a little bit. Then most likely, because we don't feel so great, we're going to self-soothe in some ways. And that's adoption of those health risk behaviors. And that has another impact of it. Then disease, of course, increase in probability of disease, mental health diseases as well, physical as well, and earlier death, up to 20 years earlier from adverse childhood experiences. All right, let's get to my fun stuff. Now, I'm not going to go into depth in polyvagal. If your eyeballs are rolling back in your head, hang in there. This is the foundational stone, I believe, of why yoga works, though. Regardless if you call it trauma-informed yoga or not, I think everybody should understand or want to understand polyvagal theory. I'm looking for my book here. Dr. Porges always say, go to the source. And Stephen Porges wrote Polyvagal Theory and presented it, back in the 90s. It's kind of relatively new. I consider the 90s not that long ago. So he said, listen, we have this evolutionary view of the nervous system that isn't complete, or how we're taught about it. So dialing it back just a little bit, the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is what keeps us alive without us thinking about it. So breathing, digestion, all those things. So just one second, I'm going to let some people into the room here. All right. Wasn't pulling up right. So we have the two main ones, sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic. I think we're familiar with that. And our sympathetic, we know, fight or flight, mobilizes us for defense. And our parasympathetic is our rest and digest. And Porges says, yeah, we absolutely have those. That's not wrong. And those two keep us in what's called homeostasis, right? Keeps us in using just enough metabolic resources to keep us alive. Don't run too hot or too cold. Unless you have previous childhood experiences, then that gets, the teeter-totter flips a little bit. So yeah, if things are, everything given equal, and there's no major stressor, day-to-day normal operating conditions, as we would say in the military, no big threats. Yeah, we're going to be in homeostasis, and the body's going to do its thing. Just like you turn your car on, it's going to throttle, and it's not going to stall out. It's not going to run too hot. That's good. We want that. We use too many metabolic resources, we die. So he says, cool. But if there is a stressor, things change. Let me first add in this third system. So that's part of polyvagal. So multiple 3 lines of the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is what he looked at, the vagal system through the body. Basically how we're wired, our electricity wiring in the house of who we are, to put it in terms that is, I think, a little helpful. And I like this picture. If you just look at this picture, This shows how this wiring is. So let's go with the oldest one before we get to the newest one. So the oldest one comes from jellyfish, right? Parasympathetic nervous system. It's in our gut, and it looks like the root system of a plant. I'm going to have a picture of that in a minute that really shows that. And this is the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve. When you hear that, most people are saying they're talking about the 10th cranial nerve, also called our dorsal vagal line. It innervates everything in the lower heart, lungs, everything in our gut, our enteric nervous system, and in the pelvic floor, and all the things that it regulates, basic primal needs of survival, right? Everything here in the torso, basically. Remember jellyfish, water. Now we're, crawling out of the water, and we got reptiles. And when we got reptiles, we got this thing called the spine over the back. It's layered over. And so this is the phylogenetic view of the nervous system, how it evolved over time. So now we have the spine, and I always do this little weird thing where I pull in my arms. I'll say, pull in your arms, kind of pull in your hips into your back, and feel as you, round, you can feel that your arms and legs actually grew out of your spine, right? Reptiles. That's why these babies are sympathetic nervous system. Yeah, fight or flight. Like these are what we'd mobilize, arms and legs. Makes sense. Grew out of the spine, our central nervous system. And so, yes, our fight or flight, it's not a bad thing. We use sympathetic nervous system to get out of bed, to move, to do what we have to do. But when in times of threat, things change a little bit. We use it more discreetly. Now we get to the really cool part of his theory, which is the face. The thing I'm hopefully innervating now. And that's the blue line right here. So now what do we get on the planet that got this? Mammals. Yeah, mammals came onto the planet, and we got this new nervous system, the ventral vagal line. And it came in, it's the 9th, 11th on the trigeminal, but it came in here. Notice all of this emanates really from the brain stem, and it came in and it comes and wraps around here, which is why we can innervate our face, right, as human mammals, and also all mammals, right? We cross species through mammals. We can actually connect through faces. And I know you fur baby mamas out there, you are doing that, right? We also do that with our human babies as well. Very important. That's a very important thing. Now, this is viewed through the lens of evolution. And so evolution times are how Dr. Porges looked at it. He said, listen, the whole job of your autonomic nervous system is to keep you alive. And it does that predominantly by conserving metabolic resources. So, well, that's interesting because this social engagement system does conserve metabolic resources. How does it do that? Well, it does that through connection. Because if I can connect with you, collaborate with you, communicate with you, then I don't have to fight you, which expends a lot of resources. All right, brilliant. Now we go to the pandemic. What did we stop doing? And then mask and all the stuff we had to do, right? And that's a threat. That's predominantly why it links right to polyvagal system. This, the social engagement system, or social operating system, as I like to call it, SOS, phone a friend, kind of got really corrupted or shut down, right? And so we became dysregulated. Again, if you're unmuted, please mute yourself. Thank you very much. I'm doing this kind of a little solo. I got Mary going on the chat for me, so I really appreciate everybody's help. Okay, so let's go to a different picture. My favorite picture. Hold on a sec, get a little, I have this problem. I can't talk. No, I talk too much. Hold on. I just love this stuff so much. All right. So looking at, first of all, I have a little brain here, got lots of brains on my table, but here's our brain. And I just want to point out the brain lives in a dark shell. Doesn't know anything, right? That really doesn't. It relies on the senses, sensory input to feed it information. And that's hardwired into our limbic part of the brain. Here is the vagus nerve. That's why I like this picture, because what does it reflect? It reflects something that we probably haven't thought of, because we're all up here top heavy, and we don't realize most of our information of the brain actually comes from the body up, right? That's why yoga is so powerful to help the brain. We talk to the body, right? We breathe, belly breathing, we're moving our body in space, all the wonderful things. I mean, exercise does that too. Yoga does something a little extra though. All right, so here's the vagus nerve. Notice it comes down, it's in the gut, right? Everything into the gut. Vagus comes from the term vagabond, which means wandering nerve. It innervates everything into our gut, our lower heart, and our lungs. There's a right and left vagus nerve. Not going to go into that right now. I noticed this also shows how it branched out to go into the ventral vagal line in the face in mammals. But look at it. It looks like the root system of a plant. And it is. If you want to think of your brain as a plant, it kind of is. So if you pulled your brain out, what would come with it? Well, it's gross, but your spinal cord and the vagus nerve, your root system. So the really amazing thing about this is the brain doesn't tell the gut what to do unless we're wired for stress. And then that HPA stress response is constantly tapping our adrenals. 80% of the time, 85% are these afferent, these are effective nerve fibers. That means they're emotional kind of in nature, sensory in nature. They're trying to feed the brain information, basically diagnostics, the status of our very being, so it can determine what metabolic resources to use or not. See, that's why it innervates the heart and the lungs and the stomach and everything that uses resources in the body. So it's all about the vagus nerve. That's why we should really care about this thing called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve wasn't even discovered. This is the earliest drawing, like 1920. And this polyvagal theory, now we're all like, whoa, and when I read In an Unspoken Voice in 2012, I was blown away. I was like, why didn't I get this information before? I had my master's in counseling. Never once was that mentioned. It was all talk therapy, talking to the frontal lobe, right? I was like, oh, wait a minute. There's something more here that we really should pay attention to. Maybe the body is a little bit more important in mental health than we thought. One of my other favorite charts, it kind of shows why we want to think about training the nervous system. And I promise we're going to do a little activity here in just a second. Hang in there. You guys are doing great. All right. So this, remember the car analogy? And I do like that. So if we're, turn your car on and you're going for a drive on the interstate, you're just humming along and no traffic, no traffic. Hey, it's great. Then you're socially engaged. You're listening to a podcast, not texting, right? But hey, here comes a car or a truck and you got to pass them. Okay, then we're going to push the gas pedal. And we want a responsive, I'd like a responsive sports car. I do not have one of those, right? I have an Atlas VW. It's kind of slow. I mean, it does the job. It's safe. I feel good in it. I wish I had like a Mercedes or a BMW, boy, that they can scream. But that's what you want. You want to be able to hit the gas pedal. So why? You can accelerate, right? And pass the truck and then decelerate quickly. And that's an effective nervous system sort of analogy. Just like if you were to test a cardiovascular system, you put somebody on a treadmill, you jack their heart rate up, not too high, right? And we kind of care about that. What are we looking for? Come off the treadmill. Does the heart rate return quickly to baseline? That's a good system. Yeah, when this stays high, space stays red flush, we got a heart problem. That's not so good, right? They don't recover so fast. Well, what if you push your gas pedal in your car and it blows up, steam comes up, that's not a good, healthy system. Same thing. If you try to, put the brakes on it, it stalls out. That's hypervigilance and hypovigilance. That is not that middle ground that we're going for. So it's all about, when I'm thinking about what are we after here in our yoga practices and our breath and meditation practices and some of these other things we're going to do, we're about training the nervous system. We want to think the primary job, the primary goal is creating a more resilient, effective nervous system. And there's some specific practices that we can do for that. So that's a healthy system. We activate for our own defense, and then we are able to deactivate quickly. We can go to this place called freeze or shut down. And that's what Dr. Porges saw in the animal world when he was watching animals playing, dead or possum. And he was like, wait a minute, humans do that too. We disassociate, or we may faint, or we just check out. I have people, I just worked with a lady the other day, and she said, they were sharing this story. I won't give into too many details. She goes, I had no recollection, but everybody said I was there. She goes, and I have no, she goes, I checked out. She goes, I think I just disassociated. I said, I think you did. And we talked about why that was. And it did have to do with, her learned response, this learned helplessness from her childhood, where it was adaptive in her situation, which was very traumatic in her childhood, to check out, but not adaptive when you're an adult and check out, right? All right, so that's why we got to do this work at the nervous system level. We want to really dial into that. Okay, moving on. We go much more into, I don't have time, so I apologize, I can't. I want to, but I got to dial it in. So how do we measure now? How do we measure this? Again, today, just work with somebody, hooked them up to an HRV monitor. We have these cool things called heart math monitors, or your new Apple Watches have them, your new Fitbits. Maybe you've watched and looked at your HRV and you've seen it and wondered, what is it? Why do I care about it? What does it do for me? I know we're all about the heart rate, but I'm all about the heart rate variability. Well, I think it's really cool. Again, pause. Let me take a sip here. Because heart rate variability is the beats between the beat of your heartbeat. And it really is a measurement of your nervous system and how effective it is. how responsive it is. Are you a Lamborghini or are we a Pinto Mustang? They don't work out so well. I'm joking because we have one and it's stalled out. So yeah, bad memories in the 70s of that Pinto Mustang. Okay, so we want to have a nice, ideally a Lamborghini of our nervous system. And this is how we do that. So this is kind of cool. So we want actually, simply put, and again, there's a lot more information out there. If you go to heartmath.org, they have a lot of research on this. We have a whole workshop on it called Restoring Balance, Training the Parasympathetic, and we hook you up. We do all that stuff. We do it online. It's really cool. But in the meantime, just briefly, we want high HRV, right? We actually want a lot of HRV. The more, the better. And so high HRV shows that we have the ability, kind of like that barometric pressure. The nervous system is constantly taking the temperature internally and externally and adjusting so we don't implode or explode, right? It's constantly doing that thing. That's self-regulation skills, ability to emotionally self-regulate predominantly. And that's why we go over to this part of the slide, why we don't just focus on breathing when you want to train your nervous system and get high HRV. That's great. Yeah, definitely breathe. And, breathing is the foundation of success in yoga. You want to take it the next level. Positive emotion. Who thought of that? Let's see here. I got my positive emotion peoples here. All right. Let's see. I have all the stuff. So, inside out, right? Joy, positive emotion. Oh, fear. So feeling stressed, fear, anxious, you know how it feels. And then we have our joy. If you haven't seen Inside Out, you got to watch it. Okay. So, but joy is a big ask for some people. So we start with something very simple, like think of something that you have appreciation for. So like working with teens, maybe it's a pet, maybe it's a friend, maybe it is an aunt or an uncle. Maybe it's a place in nature. Maybe it's a place in nature that really helps us to get to that feeling. And we have this heart-centered breathing. So let's just do that right now. Let's just do a little mini practice before we go to the next slide. And simply we'll bring our right hand to our heart and our left hand to our belly. So the vagus nerve and the heart. And we think of those as brains, right? Our belly is our primal brain. And we think of our heart really kind of as the great mediator, the great communicator. And so as we inhale and exhale, just notice the belly pushing into the hand, and the chest rising and fall. So hands are useful because they take up a lot of real estate in the brain. So like you get a paper cut, it hurts, right? So the brain pays attention where the hands are touching. Helps us to find maybe a more soothing, comforting feeling. That feeling of self, just holding here, right, feels good. And then maybe finding the breath that comes into the heart. And can we breathe from the center of our heart? And as we inhale, 5 count inhale and a 5 count exhale. And if that's not possible, just do what works. Breathing right from the center of our heart. That's where the breath is coming from. And now you can keep your eyes open, or if you want to close them for just a moment, bringing something into our mind's eye that we can find deep appreciation for, gratitude for. Maybe it's just being here. So I feel that right now. I'm so grateful for all of you. It's a real feeling, a tangible feeling that I can produce. That's a superpower, to be able to find that feeling of feeling good, regardless of the situation. That's something we have to teach our kids, right? Social emotional learning. And now let that feeling expand through your heart center, through your whole body, at the cellular level. Taking one more breath and exhaling, releasing. Now, if I had you hooked up to an HRV monitor, I'd like to think we'd see higher HRV just from that breath exercise, and we'd see that more smooth movement here, what's called coherence. Again, I don't have time to go into it, but that shows this interaction between the heart and the mind. Imagery practices that we just did. Breathing through the center of the heart helps to coordinate the connection, and the heart and the mind are trying to communicate with each other all the time. They really are. So through the vagus nerve, right, we have that connection there, and the ventral vagal line, just to put it kind of in science terms. And high HRV is effective. It makes us more effective at all levels, right? Mentally, socially, emotionally, and I would say even spiritually. Oh, love this ladder. I'm going to give credit where credit's due. This is Deb Dana and her book, her handout, and I'll pull out my other resource here. All the stuff. comes from here. So the Deb Dana, and if you're a clinician, you may want to think about this, getting this. I use it with my clients, but her polyvagal flip chart, really amazing to help people kind of walk through polyvagal theory in a practical way. Good stuff, and has some other cool pictures. I'll keep it handy. I may get it out in a minute. All right, so remember that 3-part vagus nerve system. We have the oldest one. We have the fight or flight one, and so we have our belly one. We have our sympathetic nervous system chain, and then we have our ventral vagal line. Well, those, when we use them in states of threat, now we can see how this, where rubber meets the road with vagal theory. So, when we're in a ventral vagal state, we feel safe and we're connected and social. Thanks, pandemic. Where we are in that state of flow, we feeling creative. We're feeling excited about life, right? Able to take action in our life, effective action to do the things that we need to get done and feel good, right? Who doesn't want to feel good? But when we drop down the ladder and we have to revert, maybe this has been shut down. Or this uses resources. So that's what happens. And that's part of his theory. It says, hey, this shuts down because it's using resources like lice in your house. And it turns off, and it says we got to shunt resources to the sympathetic nervous system when we're in a state of danger. So we have to mobilize to take action to protect ourselves. And that can look like fight or flight. Of course, we don't. Really, flight, running away, metabolically makes way more sense than fighting. Fighting uses a lot of resources, and the body prefer you not do that. And now, of course, I'm going to refer to people like our military and first responders, our emergency responders, our frontline medical workers. They're turning to danger. That is abnormal. Really, it is. I mean, that's why they're heroes. But there's a cost for that. We have to program people to do that. That's why we send people military to training. It takes, years and constant training. So then you turn towards danger as opposed to running away from it, which is the biological imperative, is to run away, to live, to fight another day. You can see this ripple effect through generations now. And across the board, different, now we can look at like our teachers, what they've gone through, our parents, homeschooling. There's been a lot of impact here. Okay, then if none of that works, or if the situation just really isn't calling for it, there's things that, fight or flight is just not going to work out in a car wreck, et cetera, those kind of things. You can imagine some stuff here. I hate to bring this up. If you look at people, of course, in the hospital, COVID on ventilators, there's very high chance they're going to go to that dorsal vagal state, that shutdown. And it's basically the ultimate survival act. We want to keep a little bit left in the tank. We don't want to use any more resources on fight or flighting because it's not working. And this is where children go when they're stressed a lot of the times. Children and teens, because why? They are immobilized. What if they're in a home that's very threatening? What if they're isolated? It doesn't even have to be that, and they can't get out into the world like they have been. Those normal activities have been shut down. Yes, that happened, right? They go to that state of collapse and then isolation. That's a dorsal vagal state. And that's considered a life threat experience, And so, all of our children can kind of put a checkbox in that ACE study. When they get 1 point on that. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm trying to be realistic. This is why we have an urgent mental health crisis. This is the reason for it. Okay, so now we're going to take action. Let's do this. Oh, this is your Star Wars break. You're welcome. I know you're waiting for it. Ujjayi breath. And if you haven't practiced it, we'll get a drink of water. We're going to practice it and maybe get a little Kleenex. I mean, now it's not that bad actually. Or just listen to me do it. Or listen to Darth Vader. Okay, so if you practice Ujjayi breath, you know how it works, but I'm going to teach it the way I do, and you can follow along if you like. So the first act of Ujjayi breath, why we're going to practice it is because, of course, breath practices are the #1 way we can train our nervous system, period, dot. All breath practices, fantastic. We have so many of them that are wonderful. This one is like the #1 in my mind because it's been studied and how it impacts our vagus nerve. So remember, the vagus nerve is a 10th cranial nerve. It runs over the back of the throat. It's a literal root system. And so when you breathe the way we're about to breathe, you create a wind tunnel effect in the throat, like forces the air over the back of the throat, hitting the vagus nerve. And it's kind of like, think of a spider web. It's literally toning our vagus nerve. How cool. This breath practice is just awesome. You hear it. If you've gone to yoga classes, you've heard the strong Ujjayi breathers, haven't you? Maybe you are one, right? You're like, wow, that person is breathing really loud over there. It's okay. It's okay. Maybe in that middle realm. Okay, so let's start with the exhale. We're going to bring our hand to our mouth and we're going to fog a mirror up, right? So with our mouth open. This is the easiest part. Then we're going to do the same thing with our mouth closed. So like you're fogging a mirror up. And you can feel it, to heat a breath over the back of the throat. Okay, so that's the exhale. That's easy. The inhale, let's do this. Let's bring fingers to our glottis, the base of our throat. And then imagine you're going to, as you inhale, you're going to try to suck your fingers into the base, the hollow point of your throat. But keep your throat hollow and open. Don't constrict it. It's going to pull in, but keep it open, if that makes sense, right? It's kind of just shifting it, curving it back. Okay, so inhaling. And remember, exhale, fogging a mirror up. You should be able to hear it, right? That Ujjayi breath, the warrior's breath, Darth Vader breathing. So maybe that worked for you. Here's another way that I like to do it. Take your 3 middle fingers, bring them right to the sides of your neck. And then imagine you're breathing as if you had gills in the side of your neck. So inhaling through the sides of your neck. And again, exhaling, fogging a mirror. Just a few more times. Maybe bringing to mind a place that we find enjoyable in our lives, a place in nature or with a loved one, maybe with a friend, or just a memory of a wonderful time. Just taking a moment, just a few inhales and exhales, Ujjayi breath. Nice. And release. All right. So that was kind of fun, right? So now you're going to be doing that all the time. Again, this is something simple, powerful, and effective that we can integrate. We don't have to do a whole hour yoga class, in other words, to help our nervous system. These are these little things that we add in that I'm going to give you some more cool information, but like we want to think of like a toolbox that we're going to give our kids, our teens. All right, this just a little thing. They can do that without anybody really noticing. There's breathing a little loud. They can go to the bathroom, wherever in their car. Really powerful. It's the first thing that I taught my son to do when he was dealing with his anxiety. And he saw on his Apple Watch, because he was like, I'm not doing your weird yoga stuff, Mom. Right? That was a quote. But he was in such a state of distress. He was willing. I said, well, look at your HRV. And he actually knew what that was. He's like, oh, wow, my HRV went up. I go, yeah, because Ujjayi breath actually increases heart rate variability, amongst other things. All right. So getting back to the stress response system. And I believe in teaching kids this. I don't think they're getting this information about the stress response system. They understand it, right? There's a simple way to teach it. So when we look at the stress response system, remember it's the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, which is the in the brain. And I think of the hypothalamus kind of as the thermostat of your brain, and it's in the limbic part of the brain. I'm gonna try to get my other brain out here. So you can kind of see it's in here, where that middle part, but it's right here in the middle part of your brain. So, and it coordinates with the thalamus, which is where the senses are hardwired into the brain. Remember, feeding the brain information because it doesn't know anything. And then the hypothalamus puts that together and decides what temperature to turn you up to or shut you down to, right? Or to turn on the stress response system. Like if you smell smoke, the hypothalamus, well, actually, it doesn't get involved in that. Say you see, like for me, I'm scared of dogs. Don't tell anybody. Big dogs, because I was bit by dogs. When I see a big dog, my hypothalamus goes, big dog, right, from my eyes. So when I see a big dog, yikes, my hypothalamus immediately tells the pituitary gland, which is a master gland in the brain, to release a chemical. And that's how the body talks, to itself, down to the adrenals, which sit on top of the kidneys. So they're way down here to mobilize us, because it's right near that sympathetic nervous system chain for the arms and legs. It says, you got to get running, Shaye, you got to move. If I'm not frozen in fear, it could be, I'm certainly not fighting the dog. I can tell you that. I'm either going to flight or freeze. So those are my two responses. And I don't care how logical you tell me that dog is. And my brain goes, yeah, I hear what you're saying. And my HPA axis goes, I don't actually care. Right? I'm still stressed. We're still getting out of here. All right. And that, of course, if we keep hitting that, if I'm surrounded, I can't get out of that situation, my body's going to release cortisol, and we know the impacts of that. And that has those metabolic effects. So that's basically simply the impact of stress on our body, right? The HPA axis. Okay. Another little brief practice. When someone comes to me and they've been experiencing stress, and especially children, but anybody, honestly, the number one tool I want to give them. It's not yoga, it's tapping. And you may have heard of it. It works. And there's some amazing, cool resources out there for kids, teens, adults. I use it all the time. I teach it to every single one of my yoga therapy clients. Every single one of my clients comes in with anxiety to some degree. If they're in pain, whatever they're dealing with, that causes anxiety, right? They can have anxiety for just whatever reason. So anxiety is that common human condition. Tapping is so effective. And there's some real powerful science behind it that proves why it works. So before we do it, I'm going to kind of convince you to do it because it's a little weird, right? Let's just be honest about it. But when you understand, you're like, oh, okay, maybe give it a try. Remember, the brain lives in a dark shell, knows nothing until a sensory input comes into it. And I'm going to go back to my dog analysis, right? And so the eyeballs and our optic nerve is hardwired, into the brain. So my eyeballs see the dog, and my stress response system is like an alarm bell, like the emergency broadcast system is going off in my head, like a channel, and I can't turn it. So, but the brain, its number one job is survival. And this is a really big thing here. And I would go into, because I have another slide on the brain. I want to go into this a little bit more. So the brain's number one job is survival. And it tells a story of survival a lot of the time. Or if you can't mobilize for defense, then, it's going to go to shut down. But it can only tell one story at a time. That's the weird thing about the brain. No matter if you think you can multitask, you just cannot. We know that. So the brain wants to tell one story. So right now, my brain, focused on the dog, dialed in on the dog, is telling the story. The dog is coming at me, it's scary. Okay. So I need to give it a different input. In other words, it's like the sensory 911 operator, the old fashioned 911 operator gets the call in from the vision. It says, we see a dog. So I need to, now I don't know how effective this would be truly because I have such a strong response to dogs. So then maybe that wasn't the best example, but let's just say I could have an impact here. So I need to give another signal through the senses that tells it, it's like the radar just, hold on, we're getting a different input here. Is this important? Is this life-threatening? Is it not? So it stops for a moment telling that emergency broadcast story to kind of figure out, how do I integrate, assimilate this new information? And see, then we add this little thing called a narrative with it as well that helps to dial down. So usually you don't do tapping once. You're going to do it a few times up to like 11, 15 minutes, depends on the situation. And we're going to practice it here together just to experience it. So maybe you want to bring to mind, and you can dress rehearse a stressful situation and use it. Now, I don't want you to be triggered. I don't want you to call up anything that's too stressful, but just a little stressful situation, like something that causes you a little duress, just a little bit. Okay, so you can use it that way. Now, we're going to bring our 2 fingers and we're going to go to our glottis and we're going to go down 2 or 3 inches in our chest and then over to the side. And you can use right or left hand, doesn't matter. And this is called the activation point. Now, it's not on here, so just so you know, but you're going to rub in the chest wall here. Now, in my chest wall, this is like a divot point. It's like, for me, it's kind of like nails on a chalkboard. It's very uncomfortable or a little uncomfortable. So gently rubbing, like, oh, your brain goes, what is going on? Then we're going to start the script. And the script is simple. And I don't vary from this when I first teach people. I just keep it simple. There's complicated scripts out there. Doesn't have to be. So the script goes something like this. And we'll say it together. You can say it in your mind. You can say it with me. Of course, you're muted, but you're going to get to hear me say it. Even though I have this anxiety, I still deeply and completely accept myself. Even though I have this anxiety, I still deeply and completely accept myself. Then we're going to go to the top of the head, very lightly. We're not hitting it too hard. Again, a very interesting place for the mind. And we say the script. Even though I have this anxiety, I still deeply and completely accept myself. Then we go to the inner eyebrow point. Even though I have this anxiety, I still deeply and completely accept myself. Notice we're going around the eyes, outer eye. Even though I have this anxiety, I still deeply and completely accept myself. Under eye. Even though I have this anxiety, I still deeply and completely accept myself. Under nose. Even though I have this anxiety, I still deeply and completely accept myself. Chin. Even though I have this anxiety, I still deeply and completely accept myself. Collarbone. Even though I have this anxiety, I still deeply and completely accept myself. This is the weird one. We go across the body underneath the armpit about 4 inches. Even though I have this anxiety, I still deeply and completely accept myself. You can also just simply do the karate chop point. That's kind of the universal place of tapping. You might even see people do that, right? That's also okay. Nothing wrong with that. So the side of the hand, you can say that script. Again, that's a place. Again, the hands are very sensitive, so the brain pays attention to it. So what you would do is you would say, okay, I'm at a 9 out of 10 on the anxiety. How do I feel after that first round? I'm at an 8. Awesome. Do it again. How do I feel? So over time, what are we doing? We're recalibrating the nervous system, right? Through that sensory input of the mind. And we're turning the channel of the mind off the emergency broadcast system. Maybe I can get, I always say, I joke, I'm like, going to hard rock. Maybe I'm going to get to yacht rock, which is my favorite. Or the 80s, right? That's awesome. Okay. Little joke there. Moving on. So this is the brain slide that I promised love. So we have that 3-part brain. Remember, we have a 3-part nervous system. Well, we also have 3 parts of our brain. Kind of put those together here. The oldest part of our brain is that reptilian brain. We call that the lizard brain. I usually teach this like in a hand model that comes from Dr. Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. So your palm would be like your brainstem and your cerebellum. I should say your wrist is your brainstem. Your palm is like your cerebellum. Also where your amygdala is. So the reptilian brain, that's what we call it, reptilian brain. Reptiles have it, right? And so really cool information goes there. Your cerebellum, really fascinating structure in the brain, movement in space. Walking, talking, go in there, eating, things that we do, implicit program memory, riding a bike, driving a car. Things we do without thinking, to include our fight, flight, freeze response. Goes right in there. And we learn that in childhood. Okay, then our thumb curls in. And when you curl your thumb in, that's that limbic part of the brain here in yellow. That is where the hypothalamus is, right? That is where our sensory 911 operator is. And we got this with early mammals. So this is our, beautiful, emotional processing center, sensory processing center of the brain. Now, if you curl your fingers over, now we get the gray matter of the brain, the neocortex, the new brain. And we have 4 main lobes of the neocortex. Not going into there, I want to bring out one in particular in just a second. So when we have a sensory 911 operator, input here into the limbic brain, that's where it goes. It's hardwired, all of our senses. And, I see a dog. Well, guess what I do? Do I go to my frontal lobe? Oh, look at that dog. I think I'm going to try to make friends with that dog this time. That does not happen. Just doesn't happen. I do this. I flip my lid. Yeah. It's a triggered response, and I'm going to revert back to my primal reptilian brain. That is a program memory from when I was 2 years old and got bit by the dog, right? That's the power, the impact of these stressful life events. The younger, the more wired. And the weird thing is they're in our brain, in our movement patterns, but they're not in our frontal lobe. You can't even remember. I can't barely remember that story. I don't have a narrative for it, but my brain does. See, that's the thing we need to think about trauma and understand it. It's deeply embedded in our body and our nervous system. That's why we can't talk ourselves out of, just feel better, right? Why don't you just do this? Why don't you just stop doing drugs? Because that works. And people aren't stupid who smoke and do drugs and overeat and all those things. It is a primal brain response. Right? I'm not saying we shouldn't try to come out of it, for sure. Now you can understand why it's so hard to change some of those habits and patterns. And that gets into addiction. That's a whole nother workshop. Okay, moving on. Again, more information. This is that homunculus brain that I was talking about. This is the part of the neocortex. If we were to take that side view of the brain, and it's right here across the neocortex, called the parietal lobes, right across here, the headband part of the brain. Notice how it integrates the brain right and left. And what parts of our body, notice how it's, this is where we process information from the body in the brain. And this is where, again, yoga, breathing, meditation, imagery practices impact this part of the brain. A beautiful practice called yoga nidra, right? Impacts this part of the brain, helps to literally rewire and remap the brain to greater states of ease, right? So as we come back into the body a different way, you can see this here. So in red, that's our motor cortex across the brain. And then the blue is the sensory. So hands, face, tongue. What do we just tap on? The face, right? That's why the brain pays attention to it. Hands, use the hands. One of the things we do in yoga is our hand movements. I'm doing the satsanama. We have other mudras, simple hand postures. Okay, that's why how do babies learn? Put everything hands to mouth, hands to mouth. So that's a very important part of the brain. Now, when we go to a state of emotional duress and shutdown, isolation, that part of the brain shuts down. So we want to turn it back on. That's the healing part of our brain. Again, another reason why yoga practices help heal. And part of how we do that, I have a specific way of cueing that I've really kind of drawn from Dr. Siegel's idea of how the brain forms information in the brain, but sift cueing. So instead of like cueing bones and muscles where they are in space, more of imagery cueing, right? More of that more expanded sensory cueing. So cue into the senses, right? Imagine laying in a forest, right? Feeling the warm air over your skin, or imagine the sun kind of coming through the canopy of the trees, dappling on your skin, and feeling the grass, smelling the grass, hearing the birds. Very powerful, right? That is very calming, almost like a medicinal balm to our brains and moving them out of that state of duress and stress. Not to mention, you add that in with some gentle movement, like fluid flowing movements, like, wings to chest in yoga, just gently stretching, gentle chair flow. It doesn't have to be anything big. But now we're getting that somatosensory cortex. And guess what? That brain is integrated. It's actually talking right and left. It's called horizontal integration of the brain. And you got a brain talking right and left. You have we can measure this, a lowered stress response. The HPA axis gets down regulated and we have lower cortisol in the body. And that's some yoga terms there, but moving on. Okay, so let's go ahead and do just a simple standing posture, and I'll do a little sift cueing here, just real briefly. I'm just going to do it on the fly. So how about some low expectations? All right, cool. You don't have to. You can do this seated if you want. So I'm going to come to standing. Hopefully you can still hear me here. And so tree pose, right? We know that, but let's start in mountain pose. So finding our feet hip distance apart, probably feels good from sitting a little bit. Finding a little rocking action. So that's another thing I like to turn as like proprioception. That is a big part of trauma-informed yoga, is this idea of grounding and turning on those systems that get disrupted in stress and trauma. Remember, one of the responses can be we check out, or we, shut down, we lose feelings in our legs. So, getting into the feet here. So maybe fanning the toes really broadly, feeling that heaviness through the legs just a little bit. Sometimes we even have people, bouncing here, which I really like. And then staying nice and tall in our mountain pose, right? Sort of standing with purpose here. And let's just do a few breaths. Let's just inhale, expanding our breath, reaching our arms up to the sky. Exhale, allowing our breath to sink. Maybe imagine kind of heavy air, pressing our arms down. Do you want to kind of bending our knees, bringing our hands to heart center, or a gentle chair pose? And again, linking our movement to our breath as we inhale, reaching through the back of the heart, softly through the thumbs. Maybe adding in that ujjayi breath as we exhale, sitting back, weight into the heels, hip hinge. And one more time, gently reaching the arms up, keeping the shoulders, the tops of the shoulders nice and soft. And exhaling into our chair. And then to our mountain pose. And let's just rock right and left for just a moment, feeling that difference, that heavy feeling through the legs. So vestibular activation as well, right? Really important for turning on the limbic part of the brain. And then heavy feeling to the right leg. Let's just allow the left knee to lift up, opening the leg out to the side, and either placing the foot to the instep or bringing it just alongside the inner part of the right shin, not on the knee. Staying nice and tall, maybe feeling the palms of the hands, the knuckles, the webbing of the hands. Drawing our awareness down through our feet, maybe imagining a deep energetic root system through our feet, big toes, pinky toes, heel points, drawing down through the earth, just like this tree that we're looking at. Feeling the top of the head grow taller just a little bit, and then slowly releasing. Let's just switch sides. So we'll rock over to the other leg. I was cueing the left leg now, coming nice and heavy, and we lift the right leg up. Again, gently, calmly finding our tree pose. Maintaining a nice, calm breath. One of my favorite affirmations that I like to use, kids, teens, adults, is calm strength, right? We do engage our sympathetic in yoga, but we just don't want the parasympathetic to drop out. We don't want our ventral vagal line. What does calm strength feel like, right? Staying soft through our face and that heavy, relaxed feeling through the legs. Feeling a greater sense of that integrated self. And again, releasing, maybe opening, closing our hands really fast, wiggling our fingers around. It feels good. A little bit of a joint movement here through the wrists, through the elbows, maybe through the shoulders, just a little bit forward and back. And then we're just going to come back to our chair. See, simple, you did it. We don't want to, I know we love, or some of us love complicated asana and, those hard postures. But really, we want to think about what's happening. What are we doing in our nervous system? And intentionally cueing that more regulated nervous system. And of course, the imagery practices, that's what we call bhavana. And then, of course, the affirmation, which is maybe a sankalpa intention setting, that really, literally, I believe, reprograms the brain. We can reprogram the brain. So we started with the bad news. The good news is these practices, absolutely, it's almost like we're a computer programmer. We're going in and we're recoding ourselves. We're giving ourselves a new program. Notice it wasn't complicated. It wasn't fancy. Calm, strength. That's a new seed. That's a new program in the brain. And when you move into that state of ease, of inner strength, that inner vision, and we put that program in, that starts to manifest in all areas of our life, right? That little tall mustard seed starts to grow really big. And all the good news of yoga. Of course, we have some other tools that we can use with our teens, yamas and niyamas, right? And these are guidelines. I wouldn't say these are, different than direct commandments, if you will. These are, guidelines on how to better use our precious commodity of our energy and where we expend them. Of course, where are kids expending a lot of our energy into their phones? We're knowing that's having a detriment to their health, to my health as well, right? So we look at, of course, the yamas and the niyamas, and they're really practical advice. If you don't have Deb Adele's book, of course, you got to get it. Yamas and niyamas, really practical, down to earth, real time stuff we can use. And so there's some good stuff to use with kids as well in there. And then definitely, looking at the nervous system through now the chakras. Now, so we look at polyvagal theory. Of course, we go up to the spine and these, innervation centers through the spine where these nerve bundles are that help to innervate all of our organs, but also animate us, bring us to life. We don't just think of ourselves as, just, an old muscle bone suit, meat suit. Something animates us, and we acknowledge that energy in the body, that subtle energy body. And we help to try to tune ourselves to be better, greater aware of that. Okay, now, so trauma-informed yoga classes, just an example of some of the things that, children use. I think all yoga classes should be trauma-informed. And I think especially if you're dealing with kids and teens, helping children to not just survive, but thrive. What does that mean? What does that feel like? What does that look like in their life? Giving some real tools, resources for self-regulation, resiliency, and empowerment. In this ever-increasing stressful world, I don't think the world's going to get less stressful from what I've seen lately, right? So we need to equip them. We're sending them out, I believe, without this, like declawed cats. We have to prepare them for this. We have to give them these tools of resilience, intentionally training their nervous system and emotional systems. Encouraging, of course, mindful acts, emotional intelligence techniques, sharing these tools for connection and safety. And more about communication and improving relationships, peer-to-peer and from adults to our children. So, hey, good news. I'm very excited. Hot off the presses, folks. Literally just put on our website today. Very excited. I'm going to be leading. I said, this workshop is great, but I'm all about taking action. What's the point of this workshop? This understanding if I don't do something about it. And we have our We're Kids programming. That's really for adults, but I wanted to do something directly for our teens. So I'm going to be leading this workshop. I am thrilled to be leading it. An 8-week series. It's going to run on every Wednesday, starting on February 9th. I'm thinking I should know that. Anyway, so it's on the website. The link is right here, but I'll show you in just a minute. So these are going to be the themes. I won't go into it, but we're going to have an 8-week theme. You can kind of get the series. It's kind of going through the chakras a little bit here. But what I thought was what I really wanted to do was, and I believe children get this, they need to have a little bit of the science, of course, age appropriate. But every week I'm going to talk about, like dopamine and serotonin, where those come from, the gut as a brain, all the things we've been going through. Right, you got it. They can get it. They really, in fact, my daughter is way smarter than me. She just took a trig test today. What do I know about trig? Science of the nervous system, somatic tools like tapping for self-regulation, teaching them about the HPA axis, talking about the heart as a brain of a really advanced brain. We would call it a computer, a quantum computer. Again, focusing on, a really cool stuff like, just what is sound? How is sound therapeutic? Yes, chanting seed sounds a little bit. Looking at the 3-part brain, so teaching the triune brain, this idea of that inner vision that we talk about in yoga. I know, third eye, drishti, that kind of stuff. Exploring greater connection, universal consciousness, as something bigger than me, that yeah, that sort of sense of void that we all have sometimes in our lives, that existential. Children, what's the meaning here? What is this all for? Not that I'm going to give that to them. I certainly wouldn't even begin acknowledging and honoring and respecting all spiritual traditions and religions. But that needed connection is there, where just the children don't have the opportunity to explore it, to look at all these different ideas. And I will present a little bit of quantum physics even. And like my limited knowledge, right? All right. So there's cool stuff. The observer effect, they love that. The double slit experiment, entanglement theory. And then now the final week, it just, really fluid and fun, and ways we can take this out into the world and have them teach just a little tiny bit, like literally empower them. Look at what you can do, that peer-to-peer. That works really well, that peer-to-peer interaction. So encouraging that. Just a little bit about our Warrior Kids program here. You can find this online. So if you're interested in learning more about childhood trauma or trauma-informed yoga, you don't have to be a yoga teacher. You can come take this for yourself or for your children. Maybe you're a counselor. We have a lot of mental health professionals come into our Warriors and our Warrior Kids program. This is just our Warrior Kids. We also have an adult version of this. And these are the workshops involved in it. You can read some more about it. Fit and Focus Kids, Warrior Kids Childhood Trauma, really good stuff. ADD and Autism, Sensory Processing Disorders, Emotional and Physical Trauma, and then electives like Art of Storytelling, my super favorite, Caregivers, and the One Day Workshop Kids. All right, so if you have more questions about that, you reach out to me. I'm not going to go into that more. You guys can read that. I'm going to be mindful of your time here. All right, some of the resources that you're going to get here that I highly encourage if you're interested to learn more. Of course, The Body Keeps the Score, The Whole Brain Child, Trauma Through a Child's Eyes, Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve by Stan Rosenberg. And there's some more information over here. And that's the end of our presentation. Whew. Yeah, the teen series is going to have a class size limit. Oh yeah, it's in the PDF, the book. So we're going to have a minimum of 10. I'm going to have a maximum of 20. If we have more sign up, we have a highly skilled and trained people who could come in. We could do another series, or we'll put them on the waiting list and we'll do another series after that. So I encourage you, don't delay sign up. It's only $99, right? Which is a steal for YogaFit. And I like to say you're kind of getting a steal with me anyway, but I'm going to get more out of it than they are. I'm just over the moon excited. I'm definitely going to vet. It's going to be, video. I'm going to see their faces, make sure there's no creepers. Safety first. I have a lot of protocols in place for that. So I just appreciate everybody. Let me look at here. The script you used for tapping. The script was, even though I have this anxiety, I still deeply and completely accept myself. Again, you'll get this recording. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, Dr. Dan Siegel, February 9th is a Wednesday. Thank you. I thought I got it right. Awesome. Deb Jana, Victor. Thanks. Okay. Any questions? You're for free. Go ahead, unmute yourself. If you have any questions for me, please jump in. If you just want to, say hi to somebody, have some comments. It's so awesome to see so many people online here.
How many people are here, Shaye?
We had up to 70. We have 66. I think people just jumped off here.
Awesome. Great, great structured. Help me fill in some holes, not holes, but smooth out my bumps. For my the Warrior Kids. So awesome. Awesome. I'm going to look into taking the course too.
Yeah. I'm just really thrilled about it. It's been on my heart since what I've been through with my children, and I've had so many parents reach out to me, with really, really deep concern. I mean, and these are students, not that it matters this so much, but these are, your AP straight A students, and they were trying to get them admitted into the hospital. I have at least 3 of those parents I know personally very well. And I was shocked. I shouldn't have been shocked. But I was like, you're kidding. Like, these are on the surface, they're involved in activities. So it impacted children and teens at all levels. And I was just distraught. I was so heartbroken. The waiting list for mental health, as you know, is just through the roof for adults and teens. Good luck. I couldn't find one for my son. He needed one desperately, could not find one. I worked with him. Of course, here's the rule. It's hard. If you're a parent, like, you notice my daughter's not in here. Your kids don't want to work with you. It's really difficult. If you're a parent and you're beating your head, like, I want you to do yoga, you got to send to someone else. Like, my daughter would go to someone else and do yoga any day. She ain't coming to me. Yeah. That's normal. So don't beat yourself up. If you can't get your child or your spouse or anybody you're very close to do yoga. It's not your fault. It seems to be a common thing.
I'm assuming that the anatomy and physiology correlates to our military PTSD and similar.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was a foundational workshop, the YogaFit for Warriors with PTSD. That is our 2-day workshop. Actually, I'm leading it this week, Thursday and Friday. I'm leading it next week too. We have a waiting list for it because it's not just about military and PTSD. It is for all trauma. It's the foundation understanding. And, we have our military to thank for the term PTSD, right? That got put into the DSM in 1980 because of our Vietnam vets. We have a greater understanding of trauma because of our military, because we're in Iraq and Afghanistan for 20 years, because we know what PTSD looks like in the brain, because of polyvagal theory. And I kind of somewhat joke, if you're going to get PTSD, now's the time to get it because we know about it. We know it works. And it's the only diagnosis of trauma in the DSM, which is why we need to understand it. So yeah, I'm of course a big advocate, but I mean, you got, police force with PTSD, fire, frontline medical workers, people who've had COVID in hospitals. We know PTSD now is not just for the military. So it's really for everybody. So yeah, if you have more information, if you want more questions about it or have more questions about it, please don't hesitate to reach out. We have a lot of resources through our YogaFit webpage as well.
Shaye,
everybody. Yeah.
Shaye, can you tell us the target age you're looking for your teen yoga?
Yeah. I thought about this a lot, 12 to 17. And it kind of needs to be a mature 12-year-old, right? Because that's a whole different group there. And so trust me, I want to do the younger, like 7 to 12, but that's a whole different workshop. So kind of like a mature 12-year-old to the 17. So hitting that target zone right there. What I find about interesting about Zoom is that they will come online. That's the thing. I know we're zoomed out, but there's something about the safety of being in your home and not having to self-identify, knowing everybody's coming around, maybe not even their peers, people they know. So there's that safety and like, hey, I'm just coming to experience this. Shaye lives in Virginia. We got, kids all over the world maybe coming here. So that's cool. And that gives them a greater sense, where they're not so worried about what does my friend in high school think about me over here. Yeah, absolutely. The siblings want to do it. Absolutely. I would love to. That's fine. As long as they're cool with it. So, ask them. So, I think that's a really neat thing, actually. I didn't even think about that. All right. What else? Yeah, go ahead. Nicole, you had a question?
Yeah, when you say you're looking for 12 to 17, what about a mature 10-year-old? When I say he's mature, like he's his dad's deploying again, February to September. His dad has come back and forth, had a lot of PTSD we dealt with over the years, and it's made him kind of shaky, and he's dealing with lots of anxiety, depression, but he is maturity-wise, like mentally super smart, 9th grade level, super not in his, like he can't even relate with his kids his age a lot.
Yeah.
I think that's also hard for him.
Sure.
Because he's super mathematically, sciencely, everything he's just kind of too advanced for the kids in his age. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to find help for him too.
Well, Nicole, let's chat about that offline. I'm open to it. I don't want to say no, but I'm open to it. Let's reach out. Let's chat about it. I'm not going to say no, but maybe there's some other opportunities, and maybe we need to do, and maybe I need to do a program for I just want to be protective of him.
Yes, right. Yeah.
So that's I'm thinking of both, in both situations. So let me think about it a little bit more.
I understand that.
Yeah, but my heart is there with him. My heart is, I want to help him. So we'll figure something out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I will be, I'm going to save that presentation as a PDF. So yeah, good questions on that. Absolutely. Awesome. Oh, thank you guys. All the wonderful comments. Thank you. What else? Any other questions? I can't see everybody. If your hand's raised, I can't see everybody here. So I'm just, I'm going to go back to the gallery and see if anybody's got hands. You don't have to raise your hand. Just speak up. Jump on in. It's all good. All right. You guys have just been so wonderful, fantastic. You get people signed up, you don't know. You're like, oh, how many 2 people show up? I'm thrilled that so many people showed up. But it also tells me, and I think it tells all of us, that this is a critical need in our world. No one's been immune from it. We've all been touched by it. And maybe the positive coming out is that, trauma is a common word. It's a word we're going to feel more comfortable talking about. We're going to feel more comfortable talking about anxiety and depression. We're going to feel a lot more comfortable going to classes specifically for anxiety and depression, healing trauma. People are reaching the point where they're desperate. They're desperate for their kids. They will, as any parent would, they will do anything. I would do anything for mine. I know you would for yours. And we have to do something. The system is just, as we know right now, it's just broken. It cannot handle it. Our mental health professionals are struggling. They think about the vicarious trauma they've seen. If you've been called to be a yoga teacher, you have work to do. And we have work to do. It is a responsibility. And when I really do take seriously, and, there's just no better work to do. I know it is a labor, but it is a labor of deep love. Oh, I know. Me too. I'm worried about the future. I am. But when you say worry, what's the opposite of anxiety is have a plan. Let's do something. Take action. We always feel better when we do that. When we can, then we have to be the ones to do it. All right. Well, I will say good night to all of you. It's so good to see all of my friends out there and new friends, everybody who joined us. Thank you. I will be sending it, and feel free to reach out. Yep. Mary said, reach out to me, warrior@yogafit.com. I love you. I'm here to support you. You're cared for. Just know that you're loved deeply. All right. Well, I'm going to try to end it. Let's see how that works. Thank you guys. Thanks everybody for your time tonight. It was just lovely.
Thank you, Shaye.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.